learners. In this session, we will study provisions and reserves. You will learn meaning and need of provision, meaning of reserves and types of reserves. The amount set aside from the current year's profit to meet expected expenses is called provision. That is, you know that some loss is about to happen. So, it is expected. Provision is an estimated amount to meet an uncertain loss. How much amount you have to estimate, that you don't know. But anyway, you know that such a loss will happen. So, provision is an estimated amount to meet an uncertain loss or expense in the future. Example of provision: provision for doubtful debts, provision for discount on debtors, provision for depreciation, etc. Why you are providing the provision? Provisions are provided for depreciation of the assets or for the renewal of the assets or for the reduction in the value of the assets. A known liability, the amount of which cannot be determined with substantial accuracy. In such case also, provision is provided. When there is a disputed claim, provision is provided. When there is a specific loss on realization of an asset, then provisions are provided. In order to redeem a liability, we can provide provisions. To write off bad debt, we can provide provisions, that is, provision for bad debt, provision for doubtful debt. In order to meet contingent liabilities, provisions are provided. Provisions are created by debiting it in the profit and loss account. And it is created to mean a known liability or a specific contingency. Example: provision for bad and doubtful debts, provision for depreciation, etc. A provision is created irrespective of whether there is profit or loss in the business. So, it is a charge against profit. It is not available for distribution as dividend among shareholders. Provisions will not be distributed as dividend. What are the rules for making provisions? In that, it is made for a definite amount and a definite sum is set aside every year to meet the known contingency. Making a provision is a must to meet known liability or known contingency. So, provisions are made for meeting known liability. You know that such a liability is about to happen. Where you will show the provision? It is usually shown on the liability side of the balance sheet. Then coming to reserve. Reserves are the amounts set aside out of the profits. So, it is created only when there is profit. Provisions are created even though there is no profit. It is the obligation to create provision. But reserves will be created only if there is profit. Reserve is an appropriation of profit or accumulated profits to strengthen the financial position of the business. So, a portion of the profit will be kept as reserve. It is appropriated. Profit is appropriated. For which purpose? To strengthen the financial position of the business. And here, reserve is not a charge against profit. That is, reserve will be created only if there is a profit. it will not be created when there is no profit. But in the case of provision, it is a charge against profit. So, it has to be created, that is, provision has to be created even if there is no profit. Reserves are meant to cover any liability or to meet depreciation in the value of the assets. We have different types of reserves like general reserve, reserve for expansion, reserve for equalization of dividend, etc. When we categorize the reserve, we can say we have general reserve, capital reserve, secret reserve, revenue reserve, specific reserve, reserve fund and sinking fund. General reserve. It is created by setting aside revenue profit. Why we are creating general reserve? In order to strengthen the general financial position of the business, we are creating general reserve. Word itself shows general, so it is not meant for a specific purpose. General reserve is a reserve created to meet any future liability, future contingency, or to meet any unknown liability. And it is not at all legally mandatory to create general reserve, because only if there is profit we are creating reserves. General reserve is created only when there is sufficient profit, and it is shown on debit side of the profit and loss appropriation account. General reserves are retained profits as a feature we can say, and it is created by setting aside revenue profits, and general reserve are a part of the surplus. Amount for general reserve is kept aside from the profits only. If there is no profit means no reserve. General reserve is a free reserve. The object is to strengthen the financial position of the business. So, it acts as a safety cushion against all unforeseen contingencies in the future. And it is meant for, it can be utilized for all unforeseen contingencies in the future, not for a specific purpose. Reserves are undistributed profits. That is, reserves are appropriations of the profit. Provisions are pre-profit matter. Reserves are post-profit matter. That is, only if there is profit we will create reserve. But even if there is no profit, provisions will have to be created. So, one cannot talk of creating reserves without first finding out profits. Reserves strengthen the financial position of the business. And reserves are created for expansion of the business, utilization of the dividend, for redemption of debentures or for redeeming the loans. General reserve may be created out of capital profit or out of revenue profit. Reserves created out of capital profit will be capital reserve, and other reserves are revenue reserve. Capital reserve is a reserve created out of profits which are of capital nature only. So, which are the profits of capital nature? Premium on issue of shares and debentures, profits prior to incorporation, profits on revaluation of assets and liabilities. These can be considered as capital profits. Then, as a feature of capital reserve, we can say capital reserves are created out of capital profits. That is, capital profits are not regular trading profits. They are profits on transactions like profit on sale of fixed asset, profit prior to incorporation, profit on redemption of debentures, premium on issue of shares or debentures. Capital profits are seen on transactions like profit on forfeiture of shares, profit on acquisition of a business, profit which have not been earned in the regular course of business. Regular selling, profit which is arising out of regular selling is the regular course of business profits. So, if any profit is coming other than the regular course of business, such profit can be kept aside for capital reserve. Capital reserves are appropriations from the profit. These reserves cannot be distributed as dividend among the shareholders. They are used to strengthen the financial position of the business, to write off capital losses, to write off losses of abnormal nature. Capital reserves arise mainly from equity transactions between enterprise and its shareholders. Capital reserves will arise from adjustments arising in accounting for business combinations. Capital reserves arise from differences arising on transactions of foreign currency operations. Sometimes capital reserve will arise from surpluses arising from asset revaluation or any unrealized gain which has not been included in income. In such case also capital reserve will come. Examples of capital reserve: securities premium, capital redemption reserve, asset revaluation reserve, capital reserve arising out of merger and acquisitions of business. Capital reserve is created out of capital profit. So, capital profit is not regular trading profit. Capital profit is a profit on rare transactions. And capital reserve is not available for dividend distribution. Capital reserve is set aside to strengthen the financial position of the business. Utilization of capital reserve. Capital reserve can be used to issue bonus shares, to write off goodwill, to write off preliminary expenses, to write off shares or debentures, issue expenses, to write off losses prior to incorporation. What is a secret reserve? A reserve which is not shown in the balance sheet is known as secret reserve. It can be otherwise called as hidden reserve or internal reserve. The existence of this secret reserve is not disclosed in the financial statements. They strengthen the financial position of the business, and secret reserve promotes confidence and stability of the organization. Secret reserves are created by banking organizations, insurance companies, and financing companies. Revenue reserve. Revenue reserves are appropriation from revenue profit, which can be distributed by way of cash dividends. Reserves created for specific purpose are called specific reserve. They are utilized only for the purpose for which they have been created and not for any other purpose. Example of specific reserve includes dividend equalization reserve, investment fluctuation reserve, plant replacement reserve, reserve for redemption of debentures, etc. Specific reserve, from the word itself you can identify it is not a general reserve. So, specific reserve is created for a specific purpose, and it is created by setting aside revenue profits. Specific reserve is utilized for that specific purpose for which it is created, whether there is any profit or there is no profit. specific reserve must be created. It is necessary to create specific reserve in order to ascertain profit. And where you will show this specific reserve? It is shown on the debit side of the profit and loss account. Net profits are reduced if you are showing it in the profit and loss account. Now coming to another type of reserve, reserve fund. A part of profit and other surplus set aside are invested outside the business, and it is known as reserve fund. The purpose of creating reserve fund is to strengthen the financial position of the business. Features of reserve fund. Profit is set aside and invested outside the business, that is reserve fund. Investments are not for definite period. It is always created out of divisible profit. Interest received on investments representing reserve fund may not be reinvested, and reserve fund is created to strengthen the financial position of the business. Sinking fund. Sinking fund is a fund built up by annual contributions. The contributions are invested outside the business in readily realizable securities. Interest received on investments is reinvested in the same securities. Why you need sinking fund or uses of sinking fund? In order to replace fixed assets, provisions are created. Redemption of debentures are made with the help of reserves, and reserves are utilized for repayment of loan also. A sinking fund is a fund built up by annual contributions. The contributions are invested outside the business in readily realizable securities. Sinking fund investments are for a definite purpose. Sinking fund is not always out of divisible profit. Example, sinking fund for replacement of asset is provision for depreciation, and it must be created even if there is no profit. Rules in the creation of reserves. It is created by debiting the profit and loss appropriation account. It is created to meet an unknown liability. Reserves are created to strengthen the financial position of the company. Reserves are created for equalization of dividends. A reserve is created only when there is profit in the business, and reserves can be distributed among shareholders as dividend. Reserve is created without taking into consideration the actual amount required, except in the case of redemption of debentures, when a definite sum is set aside. Creation of reserve depends upon the financial policy of the business and discretion of its management. And reserve is shown on the liability side of the balance sheet as it is not a specific reserve. Dear learners, you have learnt meaning and need of provision in this session, as well as we have studied reserves and types of reserves. Hope you understood this session. Thank you.